specifying vectors. So if vectors are going to be useful, and I do allege to you that they are, then we need to know how to specify them so that people can communicate them well. To specify a vector, we'll need a reference frame, but now in addition to an origin, we need 2 axes for 2-dimensional vectors, or even 3 axes for 3-dimensional vectors. As far as we know, there are not 4 spatial dimensions, so we wouldn't need 4 axes or higher. The axes should be perpendicular. By the way, every one of these conditions can be relaxed, and there are whole math classes dedicated to what happens when you, for instance, let the axes be not at right angles and so on. But we're not going to do that because our use of this isn't for their mathematical interest, but their physical practicality, and we're going to use the most practical format. All right, we can specify a vector as a magnitude and an angle from that axis. So for instance, we have some angle, 20 degrees, measured from the axis, in this case the x-axis, and at 23 meters. Totally random vector, but that's how we can specify it. This is a natural way to specify the vector, but it can be hard to manipulate algebraically. Specifically, it doesn't let you do addition very well. It doesn't say how I take the distances and angles and add them if I have 2 vectors. Alternatively, we can say how far along each axis the tip of the vector is. This is what's called component form, and each such coordinate is called a component of the vector. So we can take that same vector and we can say that it is 21.6 meters in the plus x direction and plus 7.9 meters in the y-hat direction. And that would give us the same vector because we end up in the same place. These 2 descriptions are of course equivalent and equally valid, but we need to know how to move between them. It will turn out that component notation is particularly well suited for addition and subtraction. In more advanced cases, we'll find that radius and angle vector, so-called polar notation, can be more useful in multiplication and exponentiation, but we won't worry about that. As an example here, we can say that if we're going from this location to this location, we could either drive along 101st Street and then up Garnett, or we could go straight this way. Obviously not so much if we're driving, but if you're talking about how the quote-unquote crow flies, we can take this path. Notice that from the vector viewpoint, if this is a position vector and this is our origin, these 2 paths are equivalent. I can do this or I can do this. Now we haven't traveled the same distance, we haven't run into the same cars and so on, so they're not exactly the same, but in terms of representing that position, they are exactly the same. And of course it would be easy if you said if I wanted to then go over to, you know, this place, that I might say, well then go another one over and another one up, and now our new position vector is here, and notice that that ends up being the same 2 plus 1 that we had here, and 1 plus 1. So it was very easy to see that I end up at 3 plus 2 without actually having to draw any of the vectors. So that's the convenience. All right. Shown below are vectors superimposed on a grid, and we want to rank the magnitude of the x component of each vector. Give yourself a moment, pause the video, and then we'll come back and do it. All right, A has only 3. B has an x component, which is also 3. C has an x component, which is minus 3. D has a component, which is 0. E has a component, which is 1, just that bit. And F has one, which is minus 1. But they want the magnitudes of the components. So the negatives don't really matter here, and we see that we have that A is the same as C, and we have that E is the same as F, and D is all by itself, and 3 is more than 1 is more than 0. Now we're going to do the same sort of thing, but we're going to do it with the y components. Here, A has 0 y component. B has a y component of minus 3. C has a y component of minus 4. D has a y component of minus 3. So does E, so does F. Again, since we want magnitudes, we don't really care about the minus sign. We're going to strip it. So we see that C is the most, and that B and D and E and F are the same, and that A is by itself. And they go in this order. All right, so we're going to do a quick review of trig, which hopefully you know. Trigonometry, literally the measurement of triangles, but it is so much more than that. In math class, it's a whole semester by itself, sometimes more. There's a lot of fascinating things, and the trig functions are woven mysteriously, almost horrifically throughout the math program, all of the real number line and so on. But we're just going to really focus on the trigon part, the triangle part that we're going to do. So, as a reminder, if we have a triangle, and it has some sides, of course, we're going to insist that it's a right triangle, and we're going to pick some angle, and I'm going to choose at the moment to pick this angle, which immediately defines sides, the hypotenuse, the opposite side, and the adjacent side. Remember, the hypotenuse is always the longest side in the right triangle. The adjacent side is the other side that makes up your angle in addition to the hypotenuse, and the opposite is the one that's left over. And then we define some trig ratios. We start saying that, for instance, that the opposite over the hypotenuse is for this angle, no matter how big the hypotenuse and opposite sides are, if that angle is there, then there's a fixed number, and it depends on the angle. So it's some function of theta, and we call that function, for historical reasons, the sine. So it's a fixed number, but that fixed number depends on how big theta is, and the sine function is the function that tells you turning that angle into the ratio. Likewise, the adjacent over the hypotenuse is also a function of the angle, and we call that ratio the cosine function, or we call it cosine ratio. And finally, the opposite over the adjacent, also a function of the angle, but it's the tangent of the angle. You might remember from your trig classes that there's also things like the secant, the cosecant, and the cotangent, but those end up being kind of redundant because each of them is 1 over something else. The secant is 1 over the cosine, the cosecant is 1 over the sine, and the cotangent is 1 over the tangent. Also notice that a thing and a co of its partner show up. These are all interesting. They're historically there for interesting reasons. They used to be really useful for making tables, but really the reciprocal functions are redundant and you don't need it. More shockingly, you might remember that the tangent function itself can be written as sine of theta over cosine of theta, and so it's redundant. And in fact, even the cosine of theta is the same as the sine of theta's complement, so even the cosine is redundant, and you could theoretically get by with just the sine curve. In your math classes, at some point, they'll blow your mind by showing to you that not only are there not 6 trig functions, or 3 trig functions, or 2 trig functions, or even 1 trig function, but in fact there are no trig functions, and you can do everything with just the exponential function. So it's kind of crazy that way. But all of that is esoteric math, and we're going to talk about our practicality of it. We're going to say that our vector, A, for instance, at some angle theta, could be represented as the sum of 2 other vectors, ax and ay, and they would make up a right triangle. And therefore, we can take our trig functions and we can say that the value ax would just be the hypotenuse times cosine of theta, inverting the definition of cosine theta, and ay would be a sine theta. Or if we had ax and ay, we know that we could, from trig, we could do Pythagorean theorem, and then we can invert the tangent function. So we can go back and forth. Now we need to be a little careful because in geometry, it's the study of the earth. Things are distances, they're always positive. But for us in physics, the components can be negative. So strictly speaking here, we're talking about their magnitudes. We have to worry about their taking absolute values of them. And we need to be really careful that tangent is double valued, especially, right? There will be 2, for any ratio you give me, there are actually 2 angles that have that tangent within the first 360 degrees. So you have to make sure that it gives you the correct quadrant, and you sort of have to just do that. You have to look at that and make sure it's pointing the right way. I find that that's probably the easiest. Pretend all things are positive, just do triangle trig on it, and then impose the sine or the angle at the end according to your physical circumstance. So a reminder, here's the caveat. Trig really relates to the magnitudes of the components, so we have to be careful to assign the proper sign to the components. As an example, what would the x and y components of this vector be? All right, and when we look here, right, according to the figure we had before, we can say that A would be 11.7, and b would be, and theta would be 12. So our equations would tell us that ax was 11.7 times cosine 12, and ay is 11.7 times times sine of 12, which are apparently 11.4 and 2.4 meters respectively. But the plus x direction is rightward, and the vector points leftward. So we really need to have that we pick up a minus sign. Right, we have to keep track of that minus sign. Our actual components are minus 11.4 and plus 2.4. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. All right, life is actually much easier if we have the components of two vectors and we want to add them, because in that case, the components of the sum are the sums of the components, that kind of weird sing-song that you get in math sometimes. The components of the sum are each just the sum of the components. That is, if we can add the x components, we will get the x component of the sum, and if we add the y components, we'll get the y components of the sum. Put in mathematically, if c vector equals a vector plus b vector, then cx is ax plus bx, and cy is ay plus by, and vice versa. For each situation below, determine the components of the resultant vectors. So take a moment, put it on pause, and see what you come up with. Looking at this first one, k is a plus b plus c plus d, so kx is going to be ax plus bx plus cx plus dx, but ax is minus 2, and bx is plus 2, and cx is minus 1, and dx is plus 3. So we get minus 2, plus 2, minus 1, plus 3, which is just 2. And then if we want the y component, we do something similar. And we have ay is plus 3, and by is minus 2, and cy is 0, and dy is plus 1. So we end up with just 1. Or really, if you do the math right, 3 minus 2 is 1 plus 1 is 2. And so we end up with components of 2, 2. If we do something similar for L, we have Lx. Now we have to be careful. Lx is minus Ex. Ex is 0, so that's not a big deal. Minus Fx, but Fx is already itself minus 2. Plus G, but G has a minus 2 as its component. Sorry. Plus 3 as its component. And then plus H, which is 1. And so we end up with 2. And Ly, well, EY, it's minus EY, and EY was 3. And then it's minus FY, but FY was minus 3. And it's plus G, but G has a minus 2 Y component, and it's plus H, but that has 0, and so we end up with minus 2. And then we're going to take a shortcut, because M is also A plus B plus C plus D, and you can see that these are the same vectors. They've just moved all over the map for some reason. And since A and B and C and D have the same definition, then M equals K, so we have that. That means that MX equals KX equals 2, and MY equals KY, which is also 2. And they played the same game here, that N turns out to be, oh no, N is not the same as there, so we have to be careful. So let's do N. NX is going to be EX, which is 0, minus FX, but FX has a minus 2, minus GX, and GX has a plus 3, plus H, which has a plus 1. So we have minus 2 is 2, 5, 6. NX equals 6. And then Y is going to be 0 for E. And then minus F's, but F's is already a minus 3. And then minus G, but G is already a minus 2. And then plus H, which is 0. So we end up with 5. An important usefulness for writing this, it's nice to be able to just write equations and not have to hold the components in your head separately. So we assign algebraic names to the concepts of rightward and upward. We define something called unit vectors. These are vectors that point in a given direction, but have a magnitude of exactly 1. Not 1 meter or 1 meter per second, but just the number 1. They are essentially pointing in a direction without conveying any particular magnitude of their own. We write the name not with a vector arrow, but with a little caret, a symbol, which is literally called a hat. So we have x hat is the direction of plus x, and y hat is the direction of plus y, and z hat is the direction of plus z. I don't know why they came out this way, but I hat is the direction of x, and j hat and k hat. These are just competing notations. There's sort of two dialects in physics, and we use whichever one people use. Like, you can use it whichever one you want. Our textbook uses the x, y's, and z's. The College Board is agnostic and tends not to ask at all. This allows us to do things like saying if we have that ax is 4 meters and ay is minus 2 meters, I'm just making those up for nothing, then the a vector is 4 meters in the x hat direction plus minus 2 meters in the y hat direction. And so now I have an algebraic equation which I can manipulate algebraically. Like, I don't have to do any weird, I don't have to think about it. The mathematics just works, and we'll find that useful in some context. Also, later we'll talk about how we multiply vectors, and it'll be really useful if the vectors are already in this unit vector component notation. So this is a glimpse of the future rather than something you need maybe necessarily right now.